Achieving a gorgeous grin from home isn't a total mystery with Bite Clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all of your sleuthing friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Bite Clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
I'm stoked as hell because today our guest is Stuart Ortiz. He is the mind behind iconic found footage films Grave Encounters 1 and 2, also the mind behind Extraterrestrials, and his new film, Strange Harvest, Occult Murders in the Inland Empire, just had its world premiere as of the release of this episode at the 2024 Fantastic Fest in Austin. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here. Excited to do this.
Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to talk about both of these movies because Mary Beth and I both just watched Strange Harvest, and what a bonkers movie. So can you, for our listeners that might not have been able to see it at Fantastic Fest, can you kind of give a little brief synopsis of what it's about?
Sure. It's a true crime horror documentary about the investigation of a serial killer who was active starting in the mid-90s, going into the mid-2000s in the Inland Empire, which is in Southern California. It's about basically a documentary that's following all of his crimes, his murders, and the investigation that followed trying to catch him.
I love the format here, and you really hit that true crime, like investigation, discovery, true crime TV format so well with even the music stings and everything. So what was like your research like to craft and edit this into something that I feel like I could really stumble upon on TV until you kind of get towards the end?
I think just like, I can't say it's like, I didn't reference one like documentary or anything in particular. I think it was just the whole kind of genre of like modern sort of Netflix style documentaries, which are very cinematic and very slickly produced and well put together. And usually are just like they start, in such a way where they grab you and they have this big opening that is meant to just like totally get you invested. So that part of it, I just, I very much mirrored. I tried to make something that was just like those documentaries, and then it would be super sensationalized and just try to grab you from the very first frame of it, basically.
Without kind of getting into spoilers, I love that this kind of goes into sort of eldritch, Lovecraftian, some would say cosmic horror kind of directions with a little bit of
definitely.
How did you kind of come up with this idea of this murderer, Mr. Shiny, and what he's planning on doing?
Well, I mean, the first thing was just like landing on a serial killer. It seemed like the coolest thing to do for like a true crime documentary would be a serial killer. And then I don't know. I guess it was just a cosmic series of events that brought together. Obviously, I'm hugely influenced by like True Detective. I thought True Detective was brilliant. And I thought they did a great job in that of bringing in a little bit of cosmic horror, a little bit of otherness, but always keeping it kind of in the background and never taking it too far, like a perfect like balance there. It just seemed, a serial killer. It seemed like that he would be doing kind of these killings that could be ritualized, and it seemed like it was a cult-like in nature. And then it just got my mind going on like, what was the cult? What was he, what was this thing that he was obsessed with? What was the mythology of this whole thing? It just kind of spiraled from there.
I love the kind of incredible world building that is in this, and a lot of like the environmental storytelling that's happening. Do you have plans on like making this into like a universe? Because I could see like more stories set in this world that you've created.
Wow, that's funny. Like I've barely been talking to people about this movie, and I'm already getting that question. The answer is actually a big yes. Definitely. I mean, it's dependent on how the film does, obviously. Like, if it's hated and no one likes it and there's no one wants one, then I don't know. I still might consider it even then. But if people are interested and they like this kind of thing, I'd love to do a cinematic universe of kind of this documentary format. Like in the movie, without giving any spoilers or anything, there are a ton of Easter eggs to other stories, other whole other ideas I have there. Like, for example, in like there's like news kind of stories that you see, news segments and stuff throughout. And a lot of those news segments, they have like little tickers at the bottom, little international tickers that have stories that are going on like all over the world. I've like hidden stuff
Didn't even
amongst.
clock that.
Yeah,
I
there
need
it
to watch
is.
it again.
You got to watch it. Like, this is a movie you can probably watch 30 times and not catch everything because there's so much dense stuff. But to go back to your question, total would love to do a cinematic universe for this whole thing. With, I mean, I don't know if you watched the movie to the end credits, but there is a post-credit scene in this film, much like the Marvel shit. I plugged something in. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. But it does allude to what we are speaking of right now.
I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch because I did not know there was a post-credit scene.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. And then just
Fantastic.
like, I was really quick. I'm so curious about what it's like to keep track of and about like when to film and editing all of the segments you have, like news footage of these news conferences. You build this world so much with so many different kinds of footage that I feel like it's got to be a bit of a logistical nightmare to like figure out how to get them and like making sure you have it all there. So what was that like in your experience? Because you have Grave Encounters, which is such a different kind of found footage, and this is so much more cinematic and stylized. So I was curious what that was like for you to craft this and piece together this puzzle for the film.
It was definitely a challenge. It was just a totally unique kind of movie to make. I kind of knew going into it, the whole concept was like anything. You're when we made Grave Encounters is like you're trying to search for that idea where it's a high concept, low budget idea. It's always the hardest thing to
Yeah.
land on. So, with this project, I was very aware that it was just going to be weird and that probably the way we'd have to run it is we would shoot 80% of the movie or as much as we could in like a main unit as an actual like shoot where we shot continuously for 2.5 weeks or whatever it was that we did. And then there was going to be just a weird, wacky, extended post-production period where we still had money in our budget that we could spend. And then we were just going to figure kind of a lot of stuff out. So,
Cool.
we did a big chunk, like all the interviews, all that stuff was done in the main unit. And then a fair
Yeah.
amount of stuff was done as well. Just like random scenes, but then just like a lot of stuff was done after where it was just like picking a day. Can you come out? Let's go do it. Like, and then we reshot a
Whoa.
bunch of stuff too that I wasn't happy with and went back and did stuff over. I mean, but that was the thing about the project and that I thought would work about the approach was just that as long as the interviews were well shot and that stuff worked, that I had a lot of room within the edit that I could just play and then I could make mistakes and we could mess up, ruin things the first time around and literally go back and reshoot. Like, my thought process, we didn't have to do this. We got lucky, but like if there was a bad performance or something like that happened, I could literally replace the actor like with a new person potentially. Like things you can't ever do most of the time with the
Yeah.
conventional movie, but they just created weird scenarios where it just was really helpful for having a low budget because you could do things like that. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't know if that
Wow.
answered your question, but it was just weird.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we shot most of it as much as we could up front, and then just like there was stuff we had to shoot, and then there was like weird stuff that happened. Like a good example is day one, the first day of the shoot, like in like 4 in the morning, I got a call from there's a sequence in the movie where a teenage girl is doing like a webcam thing, and then a horrible thing happens on the webcam. But we were going to shoot that scene, and that was supposed to be our first day. And I got a email from her agent that she had like a medical emergency that later turned out to not be a big deal, but she couldn't shoot that day. So it was like first day, basically like our main scene that
Oh,
we had to
Oh.
shoot. We like lost our actress. So that was like that, like ended up getting shot later, at, like a producer's house. So it was just, but we were lucky because we could have horrible things like that happen, and we were just like, all right, well, we'll figure it out. We'll fill in the hole later, basically.
I gotta ask about leeches.
Sure.
To just like tease those who haven't been able to see it. Leeches. What a horrible way. What a horrible scene. I have to say.
Yes, yes.
Some jigsaw shit. I'm just gonna say
Yeah.
it's some fucking jigsaw shit.
Total jigsaw shit, for sure.
I don't have a question, just leeches.
Just leeches. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm trying to think like how some of that stuff came together was so weird. Like it was like a weird like confluence of events of just like how kind of the core mythology came together with like without giving stuff away, you have like this pattern in the sky, you have the symbol that the killer uses, you have the leech bite, which is kind of this particular shape, and those all were just happenstance. Like like I was thinking like
there is something guiding your hand.
There was totally something guiding my hand. It was like that. I'd had an idea in my fucked up brain for like since I was probably in high school of trying to kill someone in a pool that way, with someone like trapped in a pool, basically. And then when I got to this, it was like be interesting to do something with like an animal, and then like Lovecraft kind of got me thinking about like if it was a creature, it would have to be something horrific, like a parasite or something. And then got to that, and that seemed like a leech was cool. And then I saw that their teeth are in this pattern. I was like, are you fucking, oh my God, it's like it's the same thing. It's perfect.
Synchronicity.
It's perfect.
In the sky.
That's
so cool.
Yeah. And then it's a creepy, it's a creepy little critter that I hadn't seen used before in that way. So it just all worked out.
I was excited. It's exciting and disgusting all at the same time.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. I agree.
Oh, so it sounds like you've been a horror person for a long time. When were you introduced to horror? What age? Were you young? Sounds like it.
I was pretty young. Yeah. I had the kind of parents that just did not care what I watched. They just would, like whatever, anything goes. They had no like restrictions basically. So I was watching like The Exorcist probably when I was way too young, when I was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 or something like that. And my dad was just one of these guys, and I think this probably informed some of my just interest in filmmaking. But he would just say, I know it seems like it's scary, but it's just makeup. It's just like it's makeup. They do like these effects, and like it's not real, and he got me to look at it from that perspective, probably because he just, now looking back, he probably just didn't want to not watch the movie and didn't want to like have to turn it off because his kid was there. So he's like, I got to figure a way I can make this palatable.
But like, hey, good for him to like try to make you feel like real, like help you rationalize and be like, no, look, it's like, it's fake. It's totally fine. And then it's like, that's helpful because my family was just like, don't look, it's scary, instead of being, and like makes it even scarier. Yeah.
It was kind of like that stuff wasn't off limits. So I wasn't, I think if they'd been like, you can't watch anything, then I would have been going and investigated on my own, as I guess kids do. But nothing was ever off limits. So I watched Aliens and Exorcist and all those kind of movies when I was super young, and just was fascinated mostly from a technical perspective. That said, like Alien Chestburster definitely did some damage on me as a kid, I think, for sure.
Same.
Hell yeah.
I was 8 when I saw it, and my parents had like talked up this movie and sat down, got to the chestburster scene, and was like, turned it off. I can't handle it. So I too young. I get that.
Yeah. It's funny. Just The Exorcist is weird. That one never bothered me. I always thought it was cool, but it never freaked me out. But then like the stupidest shit, like it was funny because when I was looking at the list of movies, I was like, the first thing that came to my mind was that really scared me as a kid was this movie, Ernest Scared Stupid. It's like one of the Ernest movies. That movie damaged me more yeah. You know what I'm talking about. That movie fucked me up more than Exorcist, more than Aliens, more than like Day of the Dead, which I saw when I was way too young. Those movies were fine, but Ernest Scared Stupid, that one got me.
It's so funny because someone literally just brought that up when we were recording earlier this week or last week. Someone just brought up that movie again, and for the longest time, like we covered it on the podcast, but like a lot of people aren't as familiar with that one, and it's scary for a kid's thing.
It's scary, yeah.
It's deceptive.
Trolls, it really is.
The possession thing, it's like, it's kind of dark, yeah.
So it sounds like your father tried to like rationalize the movies, but were you scared watching horror movies as a kid? Did they get under your skin?
Like I said, I mean, for the most part, no. The occasional one, like
Yeah.
I think The Fly, definitely, like the body
Mm.
horror shit would get me kind of more so than like I was never freaked out per se by like slasher stuff. I just that never freaked me out. It was always like if anything got me, it was like body horror, chest burster, Jeff
Yeah.
Goldblum doing fly barf
Mm.
onto donuts. That was
Ugh.
the gross out. I was more like the gross out stuff grossed me out and made me look away more than like the
Yeah.
tension horror stuff freaked me out, I guess.
Yeah. That
Cool.
makes sense.
But either way, like I was like, I was a horror obsessed kid. Like I, was obsessed with Halloween and like just like every Halloween did, decorated like the whole house and drove my parents crazy. I was always the weird horror kid from very, very early on, and I don't think it's ever left me. I'm
Heck
still
yeah.
that same weirdo.
Hell yeah. Well,
Represent.
hell yeah. Do you remember the last horror movie that really scared you though?
Oh God, you're gonna put me on the spot with the last horror movie that scared me. Let's see. I want to say it was actually something that was not that long ago. No, I'd want to give you an honest answer, and I can't remember the last thing that I saw that really freaked me out.
Okay. Okay.
Let me think about it. We'll come back to it.
Okay.
Let me
Yes,
keep
Sounds
you,
good.
going in
you
the
just should
brain
just
because
shout it out
yeah,
when you
I
think
might
about
just
it.
randomly scream yell it out at some point. I think there's
Hell
something like
yeah.
there's hasn't been something for like a long time where I've been like, oh my God, but I think there's been something like in the last year that I was like, I'll come back to it. The whole movie itself didn't freak me out, but the recent movie, In a Violent Nature, that came out.
Okay.
I don't know if you
Oh,
guys
yeah,
have seen that movie
yeah.
yet or if you've
Oh
covered
yeah.
it
Oh
yet.
yeah.
Okay, so
Oh
you know
yeah,
about
yeah.
it. I know about that movie because actually, as like a side gig, I edit trailers and I actually worked on the trailer for that movie, so I got to see it early, which was cool. But
Oh,
That's cool.
sick.
yeah, yeah, and that movie like kind of did it for me. I know it was like divisive and a lot of people didn't like it or whatever, but like I'm a big fan of the Gus Van Sant, like his movies Elephant and Jerry and the
Yeah.
one he did on Kurt Cobain. So I immediately got what that guy was doing. I thought it was cool, but there's a kill in that movie that involves a guy a ranger getting killed on a
Oh my
machine,
God.
and just the context of how it was happening, like the situation that he created for that guy and like what he went through, I just thought was the most psychologically, like I was just really disturbed by that particular kill.
Yes.
That
And it
really
goes
got
on for
me.
so long. And it
It
because it's
goes
just
on
like you
for
could it feels like the torture. I feel like with like that felt like a torture scene. Like it really was just like prolonged.
And
And
the idea of this guy being like just immobilized, where you're like sort of trapped in
yes.
your own body, but you can't move, and like this horrible thing is happening. It was kind of like in Get Out, the way he was like was going to be trapped in his mind,
Yes.
basically. Something about that idea to me is really disturbing. So that got me. That scene got me in a recent movie.
That movie has
I
some really good
appreciate that.
kills in it. Like everyone talks about the yoga kill, but like that
Sure.
kill was probably one of my favorites too. I have to
Yeah,
say. It
yeah.
was
It's a fucked up kill.
gnarly movie.
I can only wait to see what we're gonna see in the second one.
I
'Cause
know.
of the second
Yeah,
one.
yeah, I'm curious. Hopefully, now that that guy's kind of got hopefully carte blanche to go and do whatever he wants with more resources, he'll do something fucking sweet.
Well, on that note, Stuart, what movie did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
Well, I brought with me The Curse of the Blair Witch Project.
Yes.
Okay, so y'all, we've talked about the Blair Witch Project, but this is something entirely different. This is a mockumentary about a mockumentary exploring the life of the Blair Witch and the three missing college students. So, Stuart, tell us. Nope, I took Terry's line. I'm out of it today, Terry. Sorry.
All right, so you can do it, Mary Beth. I'm happy
No,
with you
I'm
doing
sorry.
it.
I was
Okay.
I was in a roll.
You were. It's worked for me. All right, but Stuart, so take us back, because I am very excited to talk about this one, because this also messed me up. But I'm curious, how old were you when you saw this? How did you see this? Why is this your Scarred for Life pick? Kind of give us your horror story and take us through your first watch.
All right, let's see. Well, I'll take it back all the back to the year. I guess it must have been 1998 then. So part of the reason I chose this is also because I would also like to speak about the Blair Witch Project. This is one of my favorite films of all time. This is the way I could pass it in, basically. But I do love
Hell
this.
yeah.
And I saw the Blair Witch Project kind of, I don't know if it was early or whatever, but I saw it when it was out in theater. My mom was living in San Francisco at that time, and it was not like an early screening or anything, but it was early enough. And I think probably like you had probably had you both like been following that movie when it first came out with like the marketing and all that? Were you caught up with that? Because I that totally like I was the right age, and that when the internet had just kind of was getting going, and that stuff all was amazing to me. That was like the coolest thing. Finding that movie, and the campaign they did was just incredible.
Oh yeah, I have a story about that. But so how old were you at when this was? When
Well,
was
let's
this?
see. I'd have to run the math in my mind. I am 40 big ones right now. So let's see. How old was I? My brain cannot comprehend that math.
So
If it was 99, I must have been like 17 or something like that, I think.
okay.
I was going to say
Maybe
teenager.
16, 17, I think, or maybe even younger. Yeah, like early high school, I guess. And the Blair Witch Project, just to go to that, was like hugely inspirational to me. Like still to this day, I think is an absolute masterpiece of the genre, like a culturally defining moment in horror, like bigger than even like some of these movies. It's like a major milestone. Like one of these things happens once or twice a century with like a movie, I think, and the Blair Witch Project is one of those movies. But then this, I think I must have seen it on the DVD when it came out, and that was in the day when DVDs and physical media was like a thing in and of itself. Although, from what I understand about Curse of the Blair Witch Project, it was produced and played on television initially. I
It
did not
sure
see it.
was.
I did not see it when it played on television. Unfortunately, I wish that I had because I would have been all the more excited. So I saw it a little bit late. I think I saw it on the DVD, but I mean, for people who haven't seen it, it's really really good as like a standalone.
It's
You know,
really good.
yeah, you hear that it was produced kind of alongside the movie as just sort of a promotional thing, and you think it's going to be kind of this thrown together cheap thing. It's like incredibly well done. It has really believable like fake news footage in it. It has really, really well shot, well acted like interview segments in it with like people and stuff like that. There's the occasional kind of iffy performance now and again, but like for the most part, it's very authentic and yeah, hugely inspiring to me. I mean, you watch Strange Harvest, and it's like I just kind of took the
Yeah.
playbook from what they were doing. They just took it really seriously and did not back down from being like, this is totally real. And that's what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, they shot fucking footage of Rustin Parr and like crime scene. Like, I know I'm jumping ahead, but like they really like I hadn't
Right.
seen this. Like I obviously knew about it. Blair Witch Project. I have a tattoo of it. I'm from
Oh,
this area.
fuck yeah.
Literally, like Montgomery College that they talk about in this. I live across the street from Montgomery
Oh,
College right
fuck.
now.
That's
So I was
awesome.
like, this is insane. Like it's just very funny because it's like this feels like a public access documentary. And I mean that in a good way. Like,
Right.
it has that sincerity to it that's like a teeny bit cheesy, but like it's hard to fake that kind of cheesy. And so that's why it feels so legit because you have like the long-haired professors, like you have kind of the eccentric people that they're interviewing, like this the woman
The
who's talking
Mystic
about looking for
Occurrences
them.
guy is my
The
favorite
mystic,
Yes,
yeah.
from
yes.
1970. My favorite.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. And like,
Oh, it's so good. It's just like so it's silly to the point where you're like, this has to be real.
I know, and it's like that stuff is hard to do, and the thing that I think is cool too is it expands the mythology more of the Blair Witch Project. Like, I think the Blair Witch Project, for all of its contribution to like being like a found footage movie and like the way it was made and the style of it being incredibly just influential, like people kind of forget that like part of the reason the Blair Witch Project I think is so effective and is so creepy is those guys came up with a really, really complex, dense mythology for the Blair Witch. There's like this whole scenario where like settlers moved into like an area and then like it got cursed and they like left that area and never returned and they started like a new like area and like there's like this other like kind of colony that's like a lost area, like this whole mythology that's barely hinted at in the movie, but that's the brilliance of the movie is I think you kind of get through osmosis listening to their interviews and stuff, you get this idea of the mythology, but it's never like a complete picture, but it feels authentic because there's so many kind of different loose ends and you're kind of picking up on them all that it really lends it this credibility. And I just think it's something that is not talked about enough with Blair Witch Project, is that yes, didn't create found footage, but it certainly popularized it and made it like put it in the cultural consciousness in a modern sense. Um, but the writing, the story, the backstory that those guys came up with is great, is really
Yeah.
great, And to me, when I was making Strange Harvest, it's like I was like, if unless my mythology is can be at least remotely that complex, like it's not going to work. I have to aim for something like at least that was my linchpin, I guess you would say, or like my hallmark that I was trying to aim for. I don't know if I succeeded at all, but I was very influenced by their mythology that they explore more in Curse of the Blair Witch.
I will say I did Google a couple things, because I was like, is this a real thing? Like, I know this movie is fake, but is this a real concept? So I will say that there were a couple things that you did have me kind of being like,
Yeah.
interesting. So I'd say that was successful.
What can I ask you? What were those things?
The names of things,
Uh-huh.
like
Uh-huh.
the way the creature names, I was like, is that a real thing? So I kind of went down a rabbit hole of looking up
Nice.
things.
I like to
And
hear
so
that.
it's hard to talk about it without spoiling it. But yes,
Sure,
you sent
sure.
me down a rabbit hole. So thank you. Anyway, sorry, Terry. What were
So
you saying?
no, I was the perfect candidate for this movie. I want to take you back. 1999, so I was 18 when it came out, and I lived in a house that did not have cable nor the internet. So while people had, that ability, I did not. And I started hearing about this movie called The Blair Witch that was supposedly real, and I bought it hook, line, and sinker. And then when I found out that they were doing this documentary, and I'm using that in scare quotes, for Sci-Fi Channel, I was like, I need to see this, but I don't have cable. So one of my friends was really good at taping things off cable and giving me a VHS tape with whatever it was. That's first how I first saw South Park, was them copying a couple
Perfect.
episodes and then
That's
handing me the
perfect.
tape. And I would hide it. I hid my tape from my parents because they were like, you can't watch South Park. And I would watch it at night as if I was doing something illicit. And so when it was going to air on Sci-Fi, on the Sci-Fi channel, which back then was actually SCI-FI, none of this SYFY
Right,
that they
right,
are
right.
now. But back then, one of my
Memories.
friends taped it off. So I know exactly when I saw this because it came out on July 12th, 1999, and I watched it July 13th, the next day, 1999, on my
Mm.
VHS tape. And I was like, at the time, again, no internet, no cable TV. Did I put two and two together that a documentary of this that was real probably wouldn't air on the Sci-Fi Channel? Of course not. My media literacy back then, not so great. So like I was like, this is real. This is real. I gotta watch this. And what this thing did, watching it before I would go see the actual movie, was it like made me feel like a detective. Like there's all this little mythology about the time back then and Rustin Parr and this
Right.
house and all of this mythology that the Blair Witch would utilize but not necessarily speak to. So when I was watching that movie, and I didn't even realize this till rewatching this, and I was like, oh yeah, it put me back in the mind space of being that 18-year-old kid that was like, oh, that's the Rustin part, or like, and thinking that this whole thing was real. Because when I first saw the Blair Witch, I thought it was real. And this contributed completely to it. I was so obsessed that while I didn't have internet at home, when I was at work, there was internet. And back then they didn't have everything like locked down like they do now. And so I would go to the Blair Witch website and I would go down
Oh my
it's sort
God.
of like the very first like ARG that I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I went down that rabbit hole, and this show I was firmly convinced was real and was telling me real life facts.
100%. That's amazing the way you saw it. That's like you couldn't have seen it a better way. You saw it on
No.
like a pirated VHS tape with no internet, no way to like confirm any of it. And like you're right,
None.
like talking about media literacy, that's just like it was a different world at that time too. So like,
Yeah.
like it was not as easy to confirm. I mean, I guess we live in a weird world when it comes to what truth is anymore anyway, but like back then it was hard to confirm or deny anything anyway, and like it seemed totally credible. And then like, yeah, seeing that, I can see how you'd be like, "Oh my God." So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember my coworkers giving me a hard time because like they were I was like I was up in like a tizzy the first week before this movie would come out because I was like, this movie is it's real, like this is real life. I can't believe we're gonna be watching. And so everyone was like, the Blair Witch is gonna get you. And I was like, I was like, don't scare me like that. I live in Nebraska at this time. I live so far away from this. And yet, like I bought it hook, line, and sinker to the point that my coworkers who had internet had watched it the night before. And so they were like goosing me with little bits of nugget. Oh, you gotta wait until you see this for this documentary. So like it built up this whole like mythology before I even saw the Blair Witch Project. And revisiting it for this podcast, I was like, this is actually a really good mockumentary. Like I was like, this holds up. I was prepared to watch it and go, what was 18-year-old me thinking that
Right,
this was real? But I'm watching
right.
this and I'm like, no, I would have bought this back then. Like it feels real.
Yeah, no, it holds up really well. I mean, they put it together, really well. It's well produced. So, yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I totally agree.
So this came out before the movies. So there was clips in this that hadn't been seen before if you watched it before the movie was released.
Yep.
I think, yeah,
Okay.
that for sure.
Oh, okay. Because I wasn't sure about the chronology because I was like, I mean, I know these clips, but if you hadn't seen the movie yet, like it
Yeah,
probably felt like you were getting exclusive access to it or
I think
something too.
that was probably the idea. It makes me curious,
Yeah.
just like,
Okay.
like because they show all this great stuff of like, the cameras being discovered and like the footage itself being uncovered at like this weird area where like students found it or whatever. And I just wonder, like, I'm just so curious. I swear to God, if I met Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Merrick, I don't even know how much I'd asked them about Blair Witch Project itself, because so much has been picked clean of the movie. I'd probably have all my questions would be about Curse of the Blair Witch Project. I'd be like,
But there's so many
I
questions.
I know, I know, I know. And what's crazy to me too is like that when they made the movie, like, and they took it to Sundance, they completely committed to the gag. Like the actors or whatever, like did go to Sundance. They had to essentially pretend that they were
Yeah.
dead. Like they had to
Yeah.
vanish
Yeah.
off the face of the earth, which is, I mean, if just people who haven't made a movie before, the concept of like making a movie and then like not being able to go out there and promote it after you've made this thing that you're so proud of, like is crazy in its own right. I mean, they took it all the way. They really took it all the way. Then when they went to Sundance and stuff, they were promoting it like it was real, and they stuck to it. And but it's an amazing thing. I mean, no one will ever forget the Blair Witch Project. It's so iconic.
I mean, and like you were saying, I wish that this documentary got attention, like more attention, because I do think it is freaky. Like I think they really do lean, especially with like I was saying before, like they talk about Rustin Parr in the Blair Witch Project as the guy who comes out of the woods and says it's over now, and they go into his cabin and discover a bunch of dead kids, and that's where the turning them around in the corner
Right.
legend kind of came from. But here they supposedly have footage of Rustin Parr confessing to the cameras, and it's shot like newsreel footage. And it's
Yeah.
just like, and the guy who plays him is really haunting looking, and the way they
He's
write
Yeah.
it makes
creepy.
him
Yeah.
look like a
Yeah.
monster. So I was watching it like if I hadn't known, like this would have been like, there's no way. Why would they have faked footage like that? It is so,
Totally.
and it's so weird. Like when at one point they go, "Oh, turn over here for a picture," and he looks over, and I
Yes.
don't know, something about it is just so haunting and real
No,
feeling.
it's
It's just,
yes. That moment
ooh,
that you're talking about, I know exactly
spooky.
what you're talking about. It's all those little things, and like I just
Yeah,
I'm so impressed by the filmmaking there, because those are all things that those were planned for and accounted for. And like I think about how poorly the whole thing could have been done, like we were talking about, looking back on it now, and like if it was poorly done, all that stuff would be cheesy, it'd be like shot in color or something like that. There'd be all these things about it that would
yeah.
be anachronistic or whatever. But you look at it and you're like, it looks like it was shot on a film, like a 16 millimeter camera, or like some old, it looks all beat up. Like it looks legit. Like they went to the effort to like really do it well. So
Yeah, that Rustin Parr thing is exactly what brought me back. Like I was watching this, like I don't remember much about this. I remember
Um,
the Mystic Occurrences guy because I was like, I really wanted to like find this thing that they had, like this video that they had at that time, because like they even have like the title and it says copyright 1971, and I was like, where
I
is
had
this video? I
I have
need
to
to see
find
this.
the
But
yeah.
it was rust in part, particularly at someone calling for him to look, and he turns to get his photo taken. That when I was watching as an adult, I was like, oh my God, this just
Yeah.
brought me back to being my 18-year-old self, seeing this on my little illicit VHS tape for the first time. And I was like, it brought me
Oh.
back to that memory of how excited and anxious and nervous I was to watch this because of it being quote unquote real. Like it's so good.
It's so good. I love that shit too. Like it's really creepy with Rustin Parr. They ask him, they're like, "What happened?" And the way he talks about, like, he's like, "I brought the kids into the house. How'd you bring them in there, Rustin? I offered them things, candy and things." Like it's so
Candy.
kind of just,
Oh.
it's so casual and realistic. Like it's,
Yeah.
like there's a blandness to it that's really realistic, and
Yeah.
it's so creepy. That shit's
And like, does
yeah.
God forgive you? And it's just like, oh, I don't, it's just
Oh,
always that. And it's
right.
just makes it all feel so uncomfortable. And on top of that, I love how they have baby photos of the actors in this to make it look, again, like, in your head, you're like, I know this isn't real, but they went this extra mile to get baby photos to like make a backstory, like you're talking about, Stuart. There's a world. It's not just what happens to them in the movie, but like they exist outside of the bounds of the Blair Witch Project, which we never get
Right.
in movies. And like her grandfather is interviewed, and it's just like so much detail is put into making us know them as more than just these characters, or trying to make us see them as more than just these characters. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah. It's just
wild.
the world building is definitely the right description of that stuff. And I don't know, it's just I think it's a really cool thing for horror, and I don't think you see it enough. Just like that commitment, that commitment to the gag and not backing down from it.
Longlegs tried to do it. I'll give them that. They really tried. They made that really cool website about all like the murders, and I got
Oh, do
really
they
into
have that?
that because yeah, they made this
Oh,
like
cool.
really cool website that looked like it was from like the 90s, and it was just like talking about the cases. There were crime scene photos, and it was built like a real thing. So it felt very Blair Witch Project. But it's so hard now because of the internet, But at the same time, it's cool to see people just say, well, fuck it. Let's just like try to make them suspend disbelief, if only for a little bit, and just get a little bit freaked out.
Yeah, that was a challenge with Strange Harvest for sure. Is just like,
Yeah.
can we even get away with it anymore? Can we even convince people for 1 second that it's real? And it's like, yes and no. I don't know. Maybe if it might be possible, I suppose, but people are
Yeah.
extremely skeptical. But to me, like, I don't know. Like, to me, I don't know how much it matters. Like, I think the presentation, if it's like it's all about when we tell stories, it's just about suspension of disbelief. When you're told any story, you're suspending your disbelief when you're told a story. It's not real what's being told, no matter what the story is. It's something that's being told as a story. So to me, it's like I don't know. It's obviously it's like would be amazing if we could prank the whole world and everyone thought Strange Heart was totally legit, and like that'd be amazing. That'd be incredible. But that said, I think even if you know it's not real or you're not 100% sure going in, I don't think that it's going to it's not going to mess up your enjoyment of the movie, I don't think. Even if you know it's not real. Just because I go to great lengths to try to suspend your disbelief.
And it works, I have to say, because like when I first started watching it, I was like, I know this is not real, but it had me like pulling up Google to be like, I want to look up what the time period that this happened in and see. So it's one of those things. But Mary Beth, I think you can talk to this with The Curse of Blair Witch because you're watching it as sort of like an artifact from 1999, whereas like I brought nostalgia to it. What was it like for your first watch as someone who loves Blair Witch so much?
I was mad I hadn't seen it sooner. And I, again, like Stuart was thinking, like, why don't we talk about this more? Like, this is a whole 45-minute like Discovery Channel special that like would play during Halloween.
Mhm.
Like, and I mean that as again as a good thing. Like, just like Stuart, I think you capture like that Netflix true crime format with like the angle and like background, like in the warehouse with the empty background, like just like that very funny, specific
Mhm.
style. They hit that PBS public access documentary style so well. And even though I know it's obviously not real, I'm watching it like, no fucking wonder people were fooled by this movie. I mean, they Artisan put in that money to make it, which I also think is incredible that I think maybe we're getting to a point where some companies are starting to get a little bit more experimental again, and maybe we're seeing people like actually take cool marketing seriously again. But like people don't think about how much money that these companies spent on the marketing. Like, yeah, it was a $20,000 movie, and then artisans spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, but at the same time, it paid off. And I think it's so cool
Yeah.
to see companies believe in their movies like that. And I think we're seeing that with Neon right now. I think we are seeing them kind of start believing. I think there are companies that are starting to believe in their weird movies more, which I really love to see. But I still think like Blair Witch is lightning in a bottle. I don't think we're ever going to get anything like that ever again. And I don't want us to, you know? I
All
think
right.
it's really cool to have grown for us to have grown up when this artifact exists. It's just kind of neat to like hear all of our story. Like Terry, you have like the quintessential Blair Witch Project story, which is incredible. And it's just like it's neat.
It's like a defining thing for a lot of horror fans too, is like I feel like what is your
Yeah.
relationship with the Blair Witch Project? Like, do you like the Blair Witch Project? Are you a Blair Witch Project? It's very like polarizing. You either like it and it's totally your bag, or like I've met plenty of people who are just like, don't get it, just thought it was boring and it made me gave me motion sickness. I'm like, damn, that's a brutal review. That's all you got from it. All right, different strokes, I guess. Different strokes, you know?
Yeah, and I mean the timing of this too, because I was like, well, when did Blair Witch come out, like on the date? And it was literally 2 days before, like the documentary or the mockumentary played 2 days before the movie came out. So it's perfect advertising right there,
Oh,
right? Where it's like you see that, and then 2 days you're going to see
wow.
this movie. So like it's great on a merchandise or not merchandising marketing type of way, but also like just I think what all we're talking about, the quality of it is better than it ever had any need to be. And I think that's fantastic that something can be commercial, which is basically just an ad for this movie, but at the same time it adds something to it in a way that I don't think a lot of marketing companies understand nowadays. Like I was trying to think of sort of like the ARGs or the things that kind of came through, and like Cloverfield is another one that pops up. Like these are defining moments in marketing that I'm surprised more people haven't relied on, because it works when it works.
Strange Harvest ARG. Strange Harvest
Yes.
ARG.
I got a million ideas. I no, I agree with you though. I do, you know, I agree that Neon seems like they're, you know, with Long Legs. I'm glad that Long Legs was a success.
Mhm.
Because that just hopefully encourages them to be like, hey, there's a market for weird, like little weird idiosyncratic movies that aren't like, you know, some bigger budget thing or whatever. And I'm also glad that Longlegs has serial killer stuff that's sort of reminiscent of some of this stuff in Strange Harvest a little bit. Like just like, you
Yeah.
know, he writes letters or whatever, our killer does that. Not that that's anything super specific, but I think it helps us, you know, that Longlegs did well.
Yeah.
Oh
I
yeah.
I have just a general question, and I'm not sure if we ever can get an answer to this, but maybe the two of you, because you both are really big into found footage. No, I was surprised watching The Curse of the Blair Witch to prep for this, because they literally say the found footage was inconclusive, and I'm like, is this the first time that they've called this like found footage? Like, how did the term found footage start? Because they literally say it in this, that the found footage was inconclusive. And I was like, is this where we get that? Or is this because I'm curious about the etymology of how that kind of became a subgenre in and of itself in terms of a title for it.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think I'd ever. That's a really good question, actually. When did that term actually start getting thrown around? I feel like it probably was Blair Witch Project just because they were saying like the footage was found 10
Yeah.
years later or whatever it was, and those words kind of started getting linked together. But you're right. I don't know when it actually just became like that was the way everyone described it. I don't know.
Because I was really surprised. Because I was like, they said the found footage. Like I was like,
Right. They
because I was
said the
like, this is
thing.
like the first of its. I mean, it's not the first, but like in terms of popularizing it and creating this subgenre that's been so popular in the 2000s, this is the start of it. And here in this documentary is the found footage was inconclusive.
Truly, truly, yeah. That's why I think this is something that people need to see more. I feel like some of these kind of weird things like this are kind of getting like discovered. I know that like there's that thing Ghost Watch. I don't know if you either of you have seen Ghost Watch.
Ghost Watch
Ghost
forever.
Watch for life for sure.
Yep.
But that's like one of those things that like I had seen that like that was like a weird obscure thing I'd heard of, and like I don't even know how I found that, but that thing's like, it seems like it's kind of been discovered now, and like people are like
Mhm.
finding that. So I hope that happens with Curse of the Blair Witch. And the other thing about Curse of the Blair Witch that you just can't really do in the other format is like that creepy, just like voiceover. Curse of the Blair Witch Project has like that woman that sounds kind of like an
Yeah.
elderly woman who does like
Yes.
this voiceover talking about Ellie Kedward in the woods, and like, oh, it's really it's like that is the creepiest shit in any of those kind of like programs, like what are those, like Missing Persons, what's the show I'm thinking of with the terrifying theme song? Do 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 do. What's that
Oh,
song? Unsolved Mysteries.
Unsolved Mysteries.
mysteries.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like
Okay.
just some about that, having any kind of creepy unknown mystery with just like that drone and then just some kind of ominous voice over it on it is horrifying. It can be more horrifying than like seeing the most gratuitous horrifying thing in a horror film can just be like just that. And Curse of the Blair Witch Project has that in spades, with just talking about the witch and how she was banished, and then later on like the next season the kids started to disappear, and all that stuff is really creepy. That's the
Yeah.
stuff that really gets me in Curse of the Blair Witch Project, I think, is that kind of like section.
The stuff that I remember when I was rewatching this, the things that brought me back again to when I first saw this when I was 18 was the part towards the end where they talk about the anthropology dig and finding the tapes and whatnot, and then they
Yes.
have the Morehouse, the professor that talks like he's Dr. Phil, but they have him on, and he's like talking. They kind of hit off the idea of it being a hoax. Like the sheriff said, still think it's a hoax. Like bringing that up there, but they're bringing in that doubt, and then they have Morehouse saying that maybe this is connected to the Blair Witch. It looked like a hoax, but it was strange. They're very realistic. It was all from that time period. So like they bring up the complaint that is probably going to happen where it's like, oh, this is such a hoax. They bring it up in there, and then they dissect it from a variety of different things, and put in enough confusion in there that you're like, okay, well, I thought it may be a hoax, but this professor is saying that this is actual time period stuff, and all, and like the sedimentary going through, like there was the ash of the house, and there was all these different layers of soil that they found. Like I'm like, oh, this isn't a hoax. And then it ends with basically Heather crying into the camera and then screaming, and it's like that is how we're left with this, and you're like, I gotta go see this movie.
That
It's
stuff is
perfect.
it's so creepy too, just because. And I was that section you're talking about with the house and finding the layers of the dirt and all that shit's hugely inspiring to me because it's so realistic. It's like
Yeah.
that's what's so scary to me, is like, is it the Blair Witch Project to me is like probably if it's not my favorite horror movie, it's definitely like my top 5 or top 3 or something like that, because it presents such a realistic scenario of a paranormal scenario. Like the movie itself, and then the Curse of the Blair Witch Project, it just presents this scenario that is so realistic. You go, if this actually happened, if there was a witch and it could like curse you and follow you and haunt you and kill you, this is what it probably would be like. And it's
Yep.
all of those things you're talking about, like being like, well, maybe it was a hoax, or like we're not sure about this, or like this doesn't quite line up, but this does, and like all those kind of doubt, like all that just adds to, that's all good stuff. Like placing the doubt isn't a bad thing. It's a good thing,
No.
because if you're just like it's totally real, then you're like, well, I'm not sure. But it's always the doubt that's just is so smart and makes it just a little bit creepier. And I tried to do that in Strange Harvest with just like never being like 100% this is what happened. It's always like, well, we have a series of events, we have some commentary on what may have happened, but we're not totally sure. Because that to me is creepier. And I think that's why like a documentary format like Curse of the Blair Witch Project can be so effective, is like a documentary can't provide all the answers. It can
Right.
provide some answers, and it can wrap some things, but
Mhm.
especially if there's like horrifying supernatural things, it doesn't always have an explanation. And that to me is creepy, because like that's how that shit happens in real life. You're like, well, like I think about Shooting Grave Encounters, and there was a couple of times in that building when we experienced weird shit that I definitely cannot explain. And in
Oh,
those
really?
Sorry. That's exciting.
definitely, definitely.
Oh,
Well, do we want to wrap up and give this our rating out of 5?
sounds good. I think we're almost out of time. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Terry, you're up first. How many Rustin Pars out of 5 do you give Curse of the Blair Witch?
I was approaching this with a little bit of trepidation because I was like, 18-year-old me just bought this hook, line, and sinker. And I was like, the last thing I want to do is come on here and be like, Mary Beth being like, this was the stupidest thing ever because she had never seen it before. And me being like, oh my God, me as an 18-year-old was so fucking gullible. But I have to say, as a 44-year-old watching this, it still is like, okay, yes, some of it,
Yeah.
like the mystic occurrences stuff, now I'm like, okay, that is very like a stereotypical like presentation of like a witch in the 70s. And like, but that aside, every little detail and the fact that it would move and create such a thorough history from back in the days before it was when it was Blair coming up with that, talking about the witch, bringing all of this mythology that is just referenced maybe in the film, in the Blair Witch movie, but is like just it's there and it's concrete, and we have video footage, and video footage can never lie to us. And
Mhm.
particularly when I was 18-year-old and I was like, it's on television, this has to be true. I think it's so incredibly well done, and it was a joy to revisit it because I think it still plays incredibly well, and I think it is a good lead in to watch the Blair Witch because, again, like it did with me when I was 18, it put all these little questions in my mind so that it made me feel like a detective watching the Blair Witch. So I, this is a 5. I love this thing. I'm blown away that it has held up as well as it has in the intervening, what, 25 years. So it's 5 Rest in Pars. What about you, Mary Beth?
Yeah, I was actually being like, is 5 like too much? Like, is that too silly? But like, I mean, I guess I'm just like also biased because I'm a huge found footage dork, and this is so incredibly my shit. And I also like world building and movies and any story that has a lot of lore behind it. I love. I love feeling like I can really like occupy a world, and the way that Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Merrick are able to do that is just like so incredible. And it's wild just how hard it is for that to happen. And the fact that they were able to create not one, but two really convincing pieces of media about this, like the Blair Witch, is just like kind of astounding. And like I've said like 6 times during this recording, I really just, if this is on Tubi, like everyone can watch this, and it's 45 minutes long. Like it's not a long watch. It's free to stream. So like it's spooky season basically. So instead of watching the Blair Witch Project again, or actually it is the 25th anniversary, rewatch the Blair Witch Project and then watch this with it. It's like a 2 hour thing. It's like such a good way to spend 2 hours.
I agree.
That's my pitch for everyone. So Stuart, you have the final word. How many Rust and Pars out of 5 do you give Curse of the Blair Witch?
Oh, this is an easy 5 Rest in Pars for me.
Hell yeah.
Like you both said, I mean, it's been incredibly personally inspirational to me. You know, it is something that I think people need to see and need to hear more about. Like you were saying, it's easy to consume. It's 45 minutes. It moves pretty quickly. It's cut like it's a little sensationalist little documentary that you'd see on Sci-Fi Channel or whatever. It's very easy to watch.
Mhm.
And it expands the already great lore of the Blair Witch Project. I mean, if you're a fan of the Blair Witch Project, it's like impossible to not kind of love this thing, I think, when you watch it. And
Yeah.
it gets more into the thick of the exploring the lore even more, and is super creepy. It's creeptastic. You got to check it out.
And brief aside before we say our goodbyes, did you ever play the Blair Witch video games that they released on the PC back in like 2000s? The Blair Witch Volume 1, Rust and Par in particular. Did you ever
In
see those?
I've played a more recent game that was like
Hmm.
from maybe like 5 years
Oh
ago or
yeah.
something that was okay. But no, I've heard of those and I've been interested in those. I've heard that there was stuff produced kind of more close to when the movies came out, right? Is that the stuff you're talking
Yep.
about? Is it cool?
Yep.
Is it worth checking out?
I mean, I was obsessed I was obsessed with Blair Witch though at that time, like right after that, the movie and everything. And so when they were making video games on it, I played the first, I think there was 3 volumes. I played the first 2, and 20-year-old me really liked them. I don't know how well they've aged, but like
Right.
that was, I mean, just talking about the mythology of this movie, like those dug into Rustin Parr, and it was set in 1941. So like it dug into that as well. So like I love the kind of multimedia landscape that they had created for this. But
Yeah, no, for sure. And like so forward thinking, you barely see that now. Like it was so ahead of its time and on so many different levels. The
yeah.
whole Blair Witch Project phenomena is just total lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, it really is. Well, thank you so much, Stuart, for joining us to talk about the Curse of the Blair Witch. Are you online? Are you on socials? Where can our listeners find you? And the floor is yours to plug away. When after Fantastic Fest, is there other festivals lined up, or what's the strategy? Do you
There
know?
is. I can give a whole list
Hell
here.
yeah.
Let me see. Sorry, give me a second here to find my list. Yes, we are. Well, we're playing Fantastic Fest on so this is coming after, right? Because it's the 22nd, then I think they're playing the 26th. We're playing at Strasbourg Festival in France right around that time. We're playing at Grimfest in the UK. We were playing at the Atlanta
Oh, hell
Horror Festival.
yeah.
Actually, I should probably preface this. I can does this stuff need to be said on air? I just said because I'm reading this list and I'm like, oh, some of these aren't announced yet. I just realized.
Oh,
The Strasbourg one in France is definitely announced. Grimfest is definitely announced. Ramaskrik is a festival that we're playing at in the middle of October. That's in
Ooh.
Norway. I'm going to that one. That one's going to be super cool. I think those are the only ones I can officially announce. But
heck
yeah,
yeah.
those are the ones. As for social media, I think I have an Instagram. I don't know what the handle is, underscore Ortiz or something like that. And I make music too, so I'd like to plug that. I make
Oh,
music.
please.
Yeah, I make music
Oh, hell
as
yeah.
Black Corset with no K, so BLAC Corset. Check it out.
Awesome.
Neat. Well, listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with Curse of the Blair Witch? I would love to hear it. Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us on social media. I am at mbmcandrews on Twitter and at mb.mcandrews on Instagram.
And I'm a Gaily Dreadful everywhere.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast at Scarred Podcast on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Scarred for Life Podcast on Instagram.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, we do have a Patreon.
Thank you to Eric Bauer for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.